Hello, black people. Hello, America. Well, I forgot the title of this. This is serious. Because years before, people were killing each other. You guys don't realize right now. Probably a lot of you don't, because shock and awe of how to respond to things that a breaching method caused. It knew it'd be standing. I'm using the phrase shock and awe, and because it's one of the phrases like groupthink. Groupthink was totally on our side, trying to figure out what's going on legitimately for everyone. Um, Shock and awe is truth, but it's a reaction as a. In other words, the breaching method took reactions to how it employed black people's rights of eyes to communicate other than black people's rights of eyes communicate, like in how to. The identity of hyperrelativity has other species' bodies with two eyes, quality aspects in nature, distinct but also non-distinct from our own, and simultaneous, but also per that which is further hyper-simultaneous. See, we have the names of the people of the sciences were forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to self-value those names used the way the breaching method would knew they would. Because you guys had means when you were little kids to use correlation proper by what is actually recorded, proper description of intelligence, for example. You don't leave out how little kids could discern the breaching method, all just simply by discerning what was sickly, distinctly hurting Native Americans and colonists through themselves, which is how we could observe the value of those laws that had slavery entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies. And that was and is not clear now or nor then, because also it is inseparable from the torture extortion method against everyone, where it employed the suburbs, northern colonies and southern colonies, and designs for them to unfold before America's founders were born. There are homes that were built. There were laws that were in place against every single person relative to if they were found out to have been speaking about building infrastructure outside of internationally monitored conversations. Them and everyone, if they were even found out to have heard people speaking about building infrastructure outside of internationally monitored conversations, they hurt, torture, it did worse to everyone and everyone around them. An example not to do that, everyone was fact cheap in nature, therefore physically enslaved. They had it sickly distinctly with colors for a number of reasons, like to measure and maintain self-value rules, speaking for things like integrity, while nature itself communicates with how we have black people's rights of eyes. And these are the colors that are the same color eyes we have, while we have exceptions with the exceptions part, with the halo part. We have exception nature that come with demonstration /S of the same thing, which is how it is functional, how the identity of all space /existence, to the extent we could discern, it comes with an extent of its complete identity of relationship to itself, inseparable from that, and the value of that, three ways increasing as value, as that value, what we are trying to discern as that distinct nature of understanding, as that distinct nature of hyper invisible but still discernible that we call understanding. The parts of speech about the invisible but still discernible. Why and how we need verbs, more than one verb, to appreciate more than one verb. For example, this is appreciation of the hyper invisible but still discernible. And we only have an extent of its complete identity of relationship to itself. Again, that comes with its complete identity of relationship to itself, equally valued, and the value of that equally valued. Three ways relative to where and how. It is three ways grouped, and it's five ways grouped distinctly. Non-distinctly and simultaneously slash hyper simultaneously. We'll examine this, but in other words, first, mandated law has to be followed. There are people that are recorded involved. I didn't have no. I had involved with pretending make it look like they had conversation with me, who are increasingly. Hartford Hospital has roles with a whole bunch of people named tied to a Smith family, a Cololo family, and people with the name Casper, and people with the name C.M. Faglione, who have roles with some child abusers, leaders of the kids, proven and further recorded. And they're also pretending other as proof. In other words, they brought up their names. And in other words, priest Christopher Murphy. There's a girl who said her name reportedly is Michelle Sanquest, involved with a former mayor Gold, who increasingly has roles with people involved with criminal enterprises, with middle school kids and grammar school kids, and with sexual and medical offenders, including as people next to Harvard Hospital, like with Iola's Kitchen. Also involved with Oliveri and my neighbors with the name Coloro, involved with them, with next to Hartford Hospital and at Hartford Hospital people putting fake transcripts, fake ties to people. They have judges and prosecutors increasingly tied to a Smith family and Smith families and to a Kalal family and people with the names O'Brien, who increasingly have roles stacking fake conversations and ties to kids with police, where the ones they do conversate with them, they're planting evidences with a whole bunch of different countries and overt criminal enterprises and private ones at the same time, and recorded conscious uses of that insidiousness of people A through Z, where they do things and ask questions like, which is like phishing, where and how like most all kinds of things are classified demonstrably that are not even a secret. It's just they can't afford how they have at countries A through Z. They have the hope they'll share it together here and there, but they don't have integrity of fact, human nature, quality, aspects in nature to separate themselves from that being having been used. Collusion slash S for what originally and still caused the real needs for all natures of investigations and investigators and their campuses, you know, to imposition upon, to be able to address where and how we're not too in position upon them. We could go like that and fix everything. So you guys took and debate economics at countries A through Z. You forced the leaders to play economics, entertainment, as value, but as value systems, tactical ulterior, and damage control. In other words, there's things where we're charging each other at A through Z for stuff we don't even need to be charged for to make positive value nature progression. The suburbs were designed before cars, let alone cranes, trucks, means to transverse the oceans in the sky. In other words, the only reason we're going to space, there's a whole bunch of reasons, but they're all being generated because our one species has ignored how our system has been about positive and negative, tactical ulterior from how it is. In other words, through a breaching method. It would have been one thing if it was not through a breaching method, then we would have adapted properly. But now we're adapting where and how the breaching method is watching too, because it's nature's demonstrations of it too. Where we are, fact, human nature, quality is nature. In other words, Wethersfield police lawyers have roles with one of them. with readings of statutes with Russians involved, with Americans and Russians in Ukraine. Years before Russia and Ukraine were killing each other, I wrote on social media counterscript because Connecticut courts, they affected confessions and requests to help from me before the World Trade Center attack. I recorded it and found out it was involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and co-defendants of his, and people at and next to body dumping spots who are increasingly involved with intelligence, like all different police departments involved with the racial law. And a guy who's reportedly was his roommate, in other words, involved with them with spots and people with the name a Cololo confirmed years before, but also a Chris Walters. I only know of Chris Walters seeking me out to make confessions and demonstrations. His role as the Wethersfield Police with a whole bunch of different countries, with people from private schools that have collusions with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and news locations, names next to them with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Increasingly, people tied to body dumping spot, in other words, in shipping locations and next to them. Whiting Forensics also has roles with them with that. There's a Bob Chase with Whiting Forensics, who's involved with the Joshua Julian, involved with a whole bunch of people tied to a Kevin Dillon, and Anna Dillon, and a Thomas Dillon. Recorded involved with Facebook also, with judges and prosecutors and their family members switching and forging names, personally and professionally involved also with their kids, with the kids of medical families, putting fake things in databases and then building on that between campuses, and with all sides of criminal and civil cases where they have collusion /S and the news at the same time. So including with all sides of the World Trade Center attack as ones that also used all sides, like Saudis and Americans were forced to collusions, self-value too. Because but where and how it was self-value is where and how they have roles. As they speaking for logic, speaking things like intelligence, and then wanting and needing to value a nature of debate that requires to defend itself, self-value use /S of truths and of facts used as criminal insidiousness, natures, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, rot too. Tactically ulterior from what would have been and what would be if everyone understood James Madison and the founders behind him and his plan. Before he was a president, his plan was the one that George Washington agreed to use. And our founders are distinct from our presidents. Where they are non-distinct, that is being used to obfuscate and hide where they are distinct from them, because of the narratives and natures regarding the summaries of American history that you've heard, and the motivations for it, and roles for overcoming things like slavery, roles for having stayed roles with slavery, even though we were told to get the Constitution unabridged. We weren't allowed to because it was still entrenched. All kinds of roles with things that you couldn't stay roles with and defend, that's technically in the Constitution at the same time. If you didn't, plus if you counted, if you found out you were trying to complain about any of the laws, again, outside of internationally monitored conversations, you were sent through your own because you would hurt them and everyone around them. And that had been sustained. So even if people would counter those type of things, it would only be collusion other ways while being sentenced. In other words. So we have suits and ties. We have counters to them. We have exceptions. And the difference of that is also self-value by themselves. And they will be able to discern it. See, but what people want to start, when they try to start gathering other people using what is true always, not denying the slightest sequence shift, not denying roles with uses of questions tactilitarian from how nature uses them. One of the reasons that nature wants us to be able to appreciate be someone's leaving out the smallest finite detail or motivations for it. Increasingly, the difference between, in other words, one thing that constantly is criminally foreign influence that modern countries law names interbranch in the difference between that or intelligence tied to them. Everyone speaks for the law because the sciences share an identity. So whether you realize it or not, you're speaking for the law. I'm not a lawyer. By the way, the YouTube algorithm or the YouTube AI suggested that I was where it gives me suggestions to type in response to someone who commented on my video. One of the suggested things that I should say was that I was a lawyer. There's a Rob, the only Ron at the only Ron, I believe is his screen name, who's one of the ones involved. He's involved with New Britain Superior Court and Hartford Wethersfield Police have their Facebook pages involved with people that are directly and indirectly involved with proven child abusers, leaders of kids, first forced, and elderly. But this is also where we could observe using these evidences that show exactly that and how people have gotten away with preventing, hyper evidential because there are mass abuses of each age of fact achieving nature, where and how they employ types of, jobs to counter negative value nature progressions, acts in natures as collusions originally still, as victims / hyper victims, but in responses and in non-responses to that, and or the difference between that, it is used syntactically. And so they're on a mass scale that people are pretending they don't understand what others say as collusions with the interbranch that are being shown with the foreign at the same time. Because the same interbranch names from Connecticut, New Britain Superior Court, Hartford Courts, and Connecticut's District Court had and has roles of people from Saudi Arabia, people from Korea, people from Pakistan, people from Italy, people from Germany, people from Canada, people from Mexico who have connections with each other at and next to the campuses through time, since before anyone was born. These cultures were already differences, rackets, roles that the breaching method is about. One of the things we have black people's whites of eyes, the breaching method assign other to be communicated for nature, where it communicates with black and white. And except for all exceptions, exception nature, come with demonstration / S of the same thing. For example, nature itself will demonstrate some things are only natural as criminal insidiousness nature. While nature is demonstrating that Earth has an especial difference that is our own, distinctly, non-distinct, simultaneously / hyper simultaneously. So we could stay systems other than nature's regarding what's positive and negative. For example, regarding the relativity of water to ourselves and to the landscape around us and to our means, and to the means by our imagination, which is relative to its method that communicate, in other words, with value progressions of regarding its identity, the extent we could discern that is true always. Again, it comes with its complete identity of relationship to itself and the only increasing value of that. Or in other words, here, where Earth has that identity of relativity to itself, the same way it is equally to all parts of itself, all parts of space / existence, equal relativity to positive and what is positive and negative, where more and more positive that is also further positive onto itself or further negative onto itself. But in which case, that's because it's itself or ourselves are not we're not appreciating its a special difference as it, so that it's forced from here least of IDs. I also want to show you when you hear people speaking about intelligence, these are people that pretend. I don't know how. When I was a kid, I asked. I observed this, studied this my whole life. How people could get away with pretending they don't realize when they speak about intelligence, while they kind of clearly with delusions and criminally foreign influence, fact, human nature, quality aspects of nature, they could believe that they don't infuriate people like in New York City, where there are people stacked upon, or in any urban slash anywhere. The suburbs were designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, while being a theater, while being shown means to create positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, while those means have stayed only if they collude with criminal insidiousness natures of means to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Increasingly, people with the World Trade Center have roles with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and in the form also of federal evidences, crimes, and predicate acts, methods. Increasingly, with people on my street tied to the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center attack, and all sides of the building and the court next to it, as ones all sides too. They force Saudis to collusions with them. Weathersfield police have been switching names with someone named Scalora, or he says that there's people named Scalora involved with them, with the police forging and switching names, refusing to identify themselves, and doing little tricks while they're stacking fake, fake ties, fake nature ties to me more and more. In Connecticut, Weathersfield police with a whole bunch of different departments. They have roles with an O'Brien family and a Corolla family and a Smith family, with a whole bunch of people tied to them from other areas who have been planting evidences on my street with them. And further with the principal child offender. And with more campuses in Weathersfield, Rocky Hill, New Britain, Newington, West Hartford. Stores. Yukon has people involved with all kinds of foreign and domestic medical, including military, with sexual and medical offenders, including with judges and prosecutors. There's a Judge Killian involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids digital too. They're changing and faking digital evidences also with FBI Director Robert Luskin and his co-defendants and their roles with the Leahy family that fake conversations with me, whole fake conversations with me. I was only there for 3 days and I didn't even speak with them. We tried to, in other words, they forced me for mental evaluation. And then before they respond to this, they won't respond to me. I got this indirectly. In other words, they've been lying. They're attaching me to fake conversations with themselves and with my family since I was a kid, and with themselves since I was a kid, and others were. These are doctors at the campuses. Increasingly, there was a Rick Sanfagli and Mark Sanfaglione recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, with intelligence tied to Jonathan Mayano too. I saw, in other words, with Tim O'Brien and a Ray Colo, and their educators, and their roles with a Mayor Gold and his neighbors, people all along Hang Dog Lane, and where it runs into Two Rod Highway, and their conjunctions. Is increasingly people involved with probate court judges, plural, and prosecutors and their family members to have wire and mail crime roles with people that lived near me when I was growing up. And the timing of when the Cololo family came into the house where reportedly someone intimately tied to another police chief lived there first. And there's a police chief Centron. And there are people with Mazzucato Bakery involved with them, with the intelligence community, where they have rights to lie and put fake ties, fake natures of ties to people, where they do that in leaving out exceptions. So I don't know the Mazzucato family. All exception nature that they use criminally foreign influence. Per the Wethersfield Police Chief Cintron's communications. I never had a verbal conversation with him. He's involved with intercities, also with the people who made the confessions tied to the people with the agency with the agencies and inter-services. There are people with the Marines intercities, and there are people with the Navy and the Air Force. There's a Paul Kelly involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders against me, with a Mike Violet, and people at Hartford Hospital involved with them. All along, and with the news, has been planting evidences with their neighbors, have roles with some probate court judges, with drugs and medicines crimes with the kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders, and planting evidences, collusions all along Route 175 and its conjunctions, like Ridge Road. It has something to do with it. In other words, these are people that they made apparently faked evidences, like to make it look like they knew me by having me near them near the state capitol one time, and one time in it, I believe. It was on another one. That's not really that was one of the illusions, because these are people on all sides of criminal and civil cases and the courts themselves and the intelligence, foreign and domestic. The difference of that, they're recorded how they are kept a part of the answer slash S to where and to how. A whole bunch of Americans and people across the world we want to counter, and we're aware of there being subject treatments where they leave out and pretend not to realize that there are means to answer and end the subject. The need, especially the ones that they have to keep repeating, especially like with the narratives regarding manifesto. The FBI has roles with Rocky Hill locations and names involved also. There are proofs with the people from Maine, and then they moved Governor Malloy to Maine University. People from Maine associated with the Hugh Ogden have more digital crimes with the FBI and with the CIA, involved further with Saudi attackers. And the Saudi attackers, too, have further collusions against Saudi Arabia itself, because this has uses of differences defended, like including interbranch, black, white, female judges, collusions with some KKK, black themed, Latino themed, Italian themed, with the Wethersfield police, attaching time collusion with the principal child defender, more upskirt natures with the FBI on Twitter, with the principal upskirt nature, and their roles with the shopping centers and malls. A whole bunch of people tied to one's named Tomorrow and Colo, involved with shopping centers and malls, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw. They put fake ties, fake natures of ties. They had someone take pictures in West Hartford when I was a kid. In other words, and it has something to do with their roles with the intelligence community, with names on Church Street and Old Wethersfield. Joe DeMaul, Ray Kalal, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. People down there have roles with them, with their families, with predicate acts, with the police departments, and wire crimes with them, with people from other countries involved. Their cousins recorded, confessed, demonstrated, people they said that were their cousins. And the Wethersfield police brought this name up too. So it doesn't matter if they're cousins or not. They're criminally involved with people named Scalora that are involved with police switching and forging names, with child offenders, sexual and medical names next to the campuses, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and whiting forensics, putting restraining orders with it, as collusions with what forbid anyone, would force the principal child offender not told on. So we need to get a response too for Bob Chase, who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Also, there's a Phil Colo involved with that. Also, there are women and people on Two Rod Highway and their neighbors involved with Phil Colo with various natures of drugs and medicines crimes, with probate court judges and district court judges and prosecutors and their family members along Two Rod Highway and Hangdog Lane. Also involved with planting identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts. Has something to do with their roles with Washington, D.C. and World Trade Center with these families, including ones named Scalora, I mean Spada and Delafera, have probate court judges in their family involved with them with wire crime, mail crimes, roles with people on my street, identity theft, fraud, slanders, with people with the name Ray Colal and Joe DeMauro, also with the reservoir of Weathersfield, involved with them with federal evidences crimes, with investigators used remotely criminally foreign influence by themselves as they recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed since they were kids, as timed collusions with a whole bunch of different countries, overt criminal enterprises, and people putting fake things in databases and replacing what's actually recorded on campuses, including ones filmed 24/7, like Trinity College. There's proof that he might have been murdered, Hugh Ogden, when they said he fell through the ice and died. And I didn't leave him a message, and they have digital crime. In other words, he has something to do too. That was before all the border problems. They had rolls of people from New Mexico and people from Mexico, like with a cafe, was the owner of a cafe and people associated with the intelligence community, with former director of the FBI, associated with a cafe in Mexico, and people from Mexico associated with Claudia Scalora is involved with Central Connecticut State University, with judges and prosecutors involved with their family members, also with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and foreign and domestic medical families that are putting fake things in databases together, and rolls with U/S of that, even worse, for how they get away with it and got away with it so long too. Increasingly, there are people associated with, you know, let's get them on paper, one name in sequence. Chris Murphy, please do what's right and don't hide with this Leahy family faking conversations with me, and people associated with the Lombardos. There are people with the name Lombardo who have roles with the Department of Transportation, the DMV, and the DOT, per Weathersfield schools. They have roles with people with the name Koala, with predicate acts with Weathersfield police with them, and with private school kids who have been planting evidences on all sides of criminal and civil cases and of campuses, including with courts switching and forging names in sequence is predicate acts roles from there. Please get them on paper because they have the news on the same roles. WFSB has roles with Ray Colo and a Phil, or with a Phil Colo, but also with a whole bunch of other people along Route 3 and and to Elm Streets and Weathersfield and Rocky Hill. I never tried to seek out Eric Oliveri. Every time he sought me out, he recorded. I barely know him. He recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. He has federal evidences crimes with people and identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake motivations for it roles with people at Trinity College and Central Connecticut State University, and shipping locations like UPS and the post office and the people names next to it. His roles with corners of streets near me. He said that he has a patina brown and people next to them involved, that and people involved with he's involved with a Joshua Stryker, a Dean Alford recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. A Joshua Stryker lied about himself and me to him behind my back, and he had roles with sequence shifts together. Identity theft, fraud, slanders has something to do with their roles with people at three spots at the end of the Berlin Turnpike who have been trying to make it look like they know me and trying to make fake exceptions. As people also involved with the Joshua Julian, who is pretending he know me, I don't know him at all. Then they pretend that these are people that are putting people to fake uses of alcohol, fake uses of drugs at Hartford Hospital. Tim O'Brien and Andrew O'Brien and their family members, Ray Colal and their family members. They have roles with a whole bunch of people with unmarked police forms, foreign and domestic military, and criminal enterprises at and next to Hartford Hospital, including businesses and houses there, like named Tomorrow's Market. I don't know if they're still there, Tomorrow's Market, and Isle's Kitchen, But where the Demorals Market is now, too, that place has been involved with their families through time with predicate acts, and as the ones involved with the World Trade Center attack, and former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and people with, in other words, so they've been planting evidences also with people named Oliveri at the spots next to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut through time, and with people, and they, Eric Jensen and Eric Oliveri, and my English teacher, Mr. Neville, and people associated with him. They recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's a Matt Olson and Eric Olson have roles with them. Also, as people with whiting forensics who have been identity theft, fraud, slanders, putting kids that don't even know each other next to each other, and faked being next to each other, and they try to make fake exceptions with other cases. In other words, so Eric Olson and Matt Olson and people named Olson have roles with state police forms and people with the CIA and people with the FBI, interstates, intercities, and people with other countries' intelligence, as ones involved also with Ray Reynolds per themselves, and educators of Ray Reynolds, who have roles with drugs and medicines crimes at Valley Crest with medical offenders of kids. Also, in other words, the public television and people with the Weathersfield town offices, they have, and people with the Board of Education further have Valley Crest involved with them too, blocking comments, but not because they're legitimately putting it marked for kids. In other words, there's a Michael Emmett who's recorded planting evidences with Weathersfield Police and State Police, and with people with proven child abusers, leaders of kids. Now, these are people that are also being and haven't been involved with criminal enterprises when they were in grammar school and then when they were in middle school, and with mayors and other natures of politicians and their family members. Has something to do with their roles with intelligence families and the ones tied to Town Line Drive and its conjunctions, like Phil Pilati. His mother is one of the ones demonstrated. I don't even know his mother, and I barely know Phil Pilati. Phil Pilati has something to do with their roles with Town Line Drive and their roles planting evidences intercities and with spots next to the state judicial branch offices and their educators, putting fake things in databases with them. All sides of criminal and civil cases as timed collusions with a whole bunch of different countries per worse too involved. So I marked years before I put a counter script and put a transcript where I was getting it's a boxing script, like a boxing movie, where I make a whole bunch of different names and then legally get that name and get a whole bunch of fights, like like 4 round fights to get a big record real fast. Because then they're all me anyway. So and then to get publicity with that in the movie. And so I was pretending to be Russian, and that's all I was going to do for this fight with the name Adonai Walensky. That's why I was doing that in the piano thing. I took down, in other words, but this is also counter obfuscated, and I did it between social media. New Britain Superior Court has a bunch of Facebook pages and how they were made is involved with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, Brian Silver, and Judge Smith and Judge Killian have drugs and medicines crimes and delusions that are also evidences, as their roles with people from Ukraine and Russia involved with their games too, and their delusions are out there, and with medical campuses involved. A whole bunch of people from Hartford Hospital are roles with and as doctors, their patients, people that work with the law there. They're increasingly involved with people personally and professionally that planted evidence on all sides of my house. And that's recorded. There's an officer, Jerry Miller, who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed He's involved planting evidences on the north side of my house with um, Weathersfield Fire people. Said that they have recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They have a number of instances where they make records of what happened on the north side of my house. Other too that are connected. They've been planting evidences on all sides of my house, and the smoke was made to go through my chimney backwards that day, right after one of the guys involved with one of the child abused girls was on the roof. One of my neighbors from the other side of his house was on the roof of that house before the new neighbors moved in there, which is their family's house though. But in other words, he was on that roof with an air thing. His daughter was brought up by Miss Riley, and I didn't respond to her. Never had a personal conversation with her, like close up like that. She has roles with some Jewish themed, predicate acts. Also, not realizing because they should have reported what I recorded them doing and pretending other before that too. In other words, they hid that. There's a Fred Gruzet who's involved with neighbors of his. I don't even know their names. So they're all involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, with judges and prosecutors in Weathersfield police in a whole bunch of different countries that have been planting evidences interstates and intercities with people that increasingly people tied to a Jonathan Mariano and a Fred Gruzet have been lying to modern pastry people and Mazzucato people about me and influencing them to pretend they know me. It has something to do with their roles with the corner of Elm Street and Rocky Hill from years before they were there. The Mazzucato Bakery with my neighbors like Ray Colo and there's others like them that have all sides of criminal and civil cases and depositions too associated with Mike Pandolf and his neighbors are also involved with my neighbors, with wire crime acts and methods, and with the courts and police forms that are refusing to identify themselves legitimately and making fake exceptions in demonstration of the same things. These are ones involved with people from Russia and Ukraine, involved at Hartford Hospital, too, with a Russian lady who repeated that she was Russian. And then she reportedly fell on her head. She's roles of people that have been putting me in fake conversations with everyone around me since I was a kid, including my family members. And they know this. They're pretending other. And they're lying about why. They put me to fake uses of drugs too. And with people that has something to do with their roles with three people, with three spots at the end of the Borough Turnpike and the town lines. And like where has with the judicial branch offices and corrections offices has roles of people that have predicate acts with facts in databases, and then use/s of live progressions from that, and standing insidiousness natures that can't defend that without self-valuing how it is recorded. Tactically ulterior from what our founders communicated for themselves. And roles it is used functionally by a breaching method where self-valued roles using what our founders said, leaving what they declassify about that out are and are used to sense for the breaching method roles with that self-value. Otherwise, that body is sensed, including if that body is a majority of people, including if that body is everybody. So there's an Aaron Murphy who has roles with a Kevin Harris. I never had a word of conversation with Kevin Harris. He would planted evidence at Quinnipiac University with some judges and prosecutors. And there are proofs that might be related to Chris Murphy. These are also people involved with the Brian Silver and a Leahy family with sexual and medical offenders of kids intercities, predicate acts with names next to Central Connecticut State University through time and next to Trinity College through time. as the ones that have been planting evidences with names next to every campus I went to. A Joe DeMauro and others associated with FBI have a Finelli family involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders with them, wire mail crimes. You know, a Finelli family and the educators of mine. I never had a class with a Finelli. There's a, I believe it was a Jason Finelli and a wife of his was in a class of mine. I never had a class with her. I was only polite to her. In other words, I didn't have any communications with her. These are people that are increasingly putting fake ties, fake digital ties to other people as their roles, also with a schedule family, with some judges and prosecutors, with identity theft, fraud, slanders. A John DeMauro said it has something to do. A John DeMauro and my Saudi and the Saudis involved with them with predicate acts is at the side of Town Line Drive shopping center. Has something to do with it. Increasingly too. So in other words, please get the Weathersfield Police on paper, one name and sequence. So I don't have to keep, they're leaking things. They're the ones that are bringing this up. This is the background. I'm just saying there's Weathersfield Police that are refusing to get on paper since I was a kid. They've been stacking predicate acts with facts. Fake ties, fake natures of ties to me with people that have been putting fake things in databases roles. From off campuses, with people from off campuses putting predicate acts in databases and roles there. And part of it that was sustained until they're part of it, standard. You guys are communicating, you guys are self-valued roles, communicating other than our founders communicating for themselves, not even realizing too, blaming things like a T tax for what James Madison caused, which and the plan behind him and the founders behind him, which enabled George Washington. You guys aren't allowing honesty about the extortion of George Washington. And CT must be the cherry tree because he did not chop down that entrenched to keep the Constitution abridged and to keep who was going to try to get it unabridged. Sensible, you know, capable of being sensed by the breaching method through our own. At countries A through Z have perfected this method since before modern religious messengers were born. It had roles, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, only allowed, fathomed with nature's demonstrations, with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and of the breaching method. Instead, blamed on other things, others themselves, and then that depended more and more as people more and more better than perfect possession slash s by the breaching method. That's really what made that possession of the people that had possession of themselves, those who had roles with slavery. So when we change the colors and we have white as the slave in American history telling part of this, in other words, that's what you're going to observe. A through Z were enslaved, fact, treatment, nature wise, therefore physically. So if anyone told on those laws from any side of it, though that person was sensed and that person was hurt, killed, tortured, worse. Everyone, that was to an extent sustained on everyone. That's what it is when you have nature's communications replaced and or that person sensed when they try to use it properly. No matter if it's everyone, black pupils. Here, it's time. So we go like this, we make natures of peace agreements, we make natures of, in other words. If A through Z don't love A through Z, it's because we're doing something wrong. And first thing we're doing wrong is accepting the ground below our feet and the means to afford, like the value system to afford it better than free. We need to fix the tactically denatured earth. So, Fox Connecticut News and names next to them have roles intercities with wire crimes, whether like people with the name Eric Mendez has roles with other people named Mendez at Weathersfield Police involved with wire crimes with them through time, and police switching and forging names, and with differences racket. These are some Latino themed, black themed, KKK themed, Confederate flag themed, Italian themed, identity theft, fraud, slanders that are collusions interbranch. They spoke for their differences. They can't speak for difference. In other words, they still have delusions too regarding how to speak for black pupils, white survivors, having been replaced. How to speak for their own differences, other people's differences, when they need to call people names because they're jumping in other people's conversations. The interbranch plays games where they make people call themselves names. They make people call themselves names, one of their members, and then they lie about what they think about it. In other words, punk tricks. You guys have federal evidences rackets, only capable natures, only capable of speaking for the law at countries A through Z because of the relativity of how they're replacing what nature communicates properly for syntax with convictions regarding history's principles and what unfolded and is unfolding. So follow mandated law and Weathersfield police. Get onto paper. Don't be cowards or get out of the job. And FBI, don't hide behind them too. If you get on paper too, and the CIA, see your roles with these people named Jensen involved with the state police place on the Burn Turnpike. Also with people with the name Tomorrow. Also with people with the name Casper. Also with a Phil Cololo involved with the whiting forensics. These increasingly are people that had federal crimes with whiting forensics when I was a kid. These are increasingly people who have identity theft, fraud, slanders with people, sequence shifts with mayors like Joe Aiello, and planting evidences at and next to parks with a mayor Gold and other people associated with them. Let's get them on paper, one name and sequence. In other words, Whiting Forensics has a Mayor Gold's family per the people involved here. And these are also people that have people speak through others. So in other words, when I was a kid and as an adult, Joshua Julian's one of the ones who recorded involved with digital crimes with Whiting Forensics and state police and their campuses. Central Connecticut State University has roles with keeping state police criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. And like where and how they speak for culture too. Because they need to have a nature of debate they can't defend. Without self-valuing, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Fact cheap nature, quality aspects of nature itself as criminal insidiousness. This is also in the boxing script. My trainer, which is a black because in other words, there's a colonial Reggie and there's a regular Reggie. Because we're going to act this history because you guys are going to observe how and why we need to refer to James Madison as our founder. Because that's what we were directed to understand. James Madison, the founders behind him and his plan. Then they went and got George Washington to agree to use that plan. And that's what enabled any and all any courage, for example, that was involved. It was only enabled by that. And it was not enabled enough to liberate the Constitution from its abridgments that would be denied and still are denied through our own. And the motivations for them doing that are propagated but self-cultivated by this preaching method that maintains that an outcome. It employs the natures of difference, like black pupils, white survivors, know that we have that and how we have nature itself, its identity showing us, communicating to us, teaching us about what difference is about. We have the same color eyes. They are white and black, and we have different color eyes at the same time. And nature's identity is showing us, look, the other species' bodies have two eyes. They have quality aspects in nature distinct from you, from your species but also non-distinct, but also simultaneously, but also slash hyper simultaneously. Not only does it nature show us further hyper simultaneously, but the slash too, because it's showing us three distinct identities of hyper invisible parts of itself, even though we only have a part of a slightest bit of all of its identity, of its complete identity's volume to discern. Its complete identity's volume comes everywhere with its complete identity's relationship to itself, and the value of that equally increasing. Excuse me, as volume, where volume equals value as nature slash nature is value, and nature is value slash value as nature, and it is functional this way. The same reason it is functional, where and how left to right or east to west stays an identity distinct from, but also non-distinct from, the opposite, as what is simultaneously to greater than and more finite than. All the details and demonstration of that. In all things come with demonstration boxings of the hyper simultaneous. So also in the scene, the Reggie is someone who was he was raised a football, like he played high school football, and it probably would have been a professional, but he never went to college, never built from there on the football, or maybe it was a person who went to college on a draft and something happened. So, but anyway, he gets kicked off the West Coast, and his friend made an agreement with him before he went to jail to help him out and give him additional. In other words, if he would help his two kids from two different mothers, and so he comes with them, and his friend that goes to jail is a part of a Black Pupils, which is the real life type movie side of the cartoon value nature system side of it, where Little Rap Guy and Friends is like this. But this is also because our founders had to break the rules. They were considered, worse like terrorists or criminal enterprises for breaking syntactic rules, which are physical, because it was involved with the torture, extortion, and fact treatment nature, therefore physical slavery of names A through Z, which is also relative. We to where and how we have subject treatments that could get away with denying that, even though most people don't want that denied. At the same time, most people, they want to pretend there's some person with a name that could have integrity or could have had integrity of their name glorified correctly. In other words, they don't attack or glorify people correctly. And that exactly the way the breaching method needs, because it needs a breaching method is an identity of relativity to ourselves. And every identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. So even though it is real, so even though it is not a physically observable, it is, in order to observe it physically, first you have to begin with how it is also invisible slash hyper invisible, but still discernible. Black pupil. A front to to this also hyper invisible, but still discernible. Which has our species body distinct from, not distinct from, while non distinct from simultaneously with the other species body, but also slash further hyper simultaneously. And nature is showing us to appreciate the difference between criminal insidiousness natures of positive or negative. Criminal insidious natures are positive treatments too, like facts treatments. See, nature is showing us another way to think. I mean, and or the way nature is showing us to think. We have other described. We have theories on how we think. All kinds of medical corruption is associated with all kinds of legal corruption at Harvard Hospital. Has all kind of legal scams and delusions that are relative to black pupils. The experts on but there's also because the family members of the courts, judges and prosecutors, they're putting speaking fake things in to pretend they have integrity of mind while their delusions are off. Like a Judge Killian. He's got digital crimes with digital sex offenders of kids, including medical ones. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. They've been using the right to lie where they don't have the right to lie. Judge Napolitano, do what's right for Judge Killian and the other people. Get them on paper, one name and sequence now, please. And I want a response for the rest of the principal child abusers' confessions and confirmations. And they hid what brought it up. A whole bunch of people tied to a Robert Rodriguez and and uh, um, and people with Daryl Chandler. And I don't know his sister's name and his family name. They have something to do with the intelligence community intercities and spots associated with them and their roles with people with the name Tomorrow and Mike Roberts, interstates involved with state police, families, and other agencies and courts with switching and putting fake things in things and their educators. I never had class with Mike Roberts in my life. He's involved with also with the black KKK themed Confederate flag themed collusions and sequence shifts at the judicial branch offices, increasingly with people on White on Two Highway and Hang Dog Lane involved with tied to this Phil Collo and people involved with World Trade Center predicate acts and pretending passions and emotions behind my back and on paper to hide their cover-ups. Increasingly, get them on paper, one name and sequence. In other words, nature itself, they're pretending that they're legitimately fishing. You know, but they're using the victims of the World Trade Center attack they were calling them as victims, but they're leaving out the recorded collusion /s with the Saudi attackers at spots and with names next to WFSB and next to Fox Connecticut News as ones at all sides of criminal and civil cases with the family members of the judges and prosecutors. A whole bunch of federal criminally foreign influence uses of investigators at Covington Street next to and the other sides of Central Connecticut State University through time has something to do with people that were in other classes and had other teachers from me who were putting fake things and speaking fake things to their teachers and other students behind my back without me realizing to make it look like we knew each other, to have others do it through time. They're increasingly doing this. Increasingly, people acted for others to make it look like that I knew them at the side of at the sides of Weathersfield High School. Increasingly, those are people involved I caught with the principal child offender and planting evidences with the news at the same time when they were forcing the principal child offender not told on. They were planting evidences with the name speaking with them. Has something to do with their roles with a Joshua Julian, a Mark Violet, and a Paul Kelly with some intermilitary at and next to the hospitals and campuses, like Harvard Hospital, though, has a Iola's Kitchen, Tomorrow's Market, and has a Mayano Family House involved with them, with their educators, with identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts, federal crimes of people with names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, and depositions at the same sequence shifts, the same identity theft, fraud, slander, fake ties, fake natures ties to me. Then they have to cover that up years later, and including with the news at the same time, fake conversations with me. Please, WFSB, do what's right. Don't make people beg, and get the coward parents in the background onto paper. If they made a mistake or they heard that, then tell on that person. I'm doing it here for you anyway. You have a former former police chiefs from Weathersfield named Citron, who quoted, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with people named Kevin Dillon, also with an officer Jerry Miller, and people named Kerr, and people named Della Fera and Spada, who have been planting evidences with probate court judges and superior court judges, and Connecticut's district court has people involved with people that have been planting evidence on all sides of my house and all sides of the World Trade Center, and leading up to the attack, long term and short term, those same people were involved interstates and intercities, time collusion slash also internationally. Central Connecticut State University and Trinity College and UConn have roles with Saudis that are criminally foreign influence here and there. Tactically delusion is right here and there, but we don't have an identity of the law capable of speaking for the law legitimately at countries A through Z. We have suits and ties, counters, and exceptions as collusions against what the Quran and the Old Testament are about at the beginning till they dictate how to defend those books. And the people want to use who they know how they want to defend them out of sequence and use how they know more about it than other people to get over on people who don't even need to know the books to know that. It says right at the beginning of the Old Testament, only defend right here, where the names of the people of the sciences will come together in the part before it. The nature of debate regarding that, or the validity of it, it contains quality aspects of nature. It contains of collusion slash S with child defenders, leaders of the kids still, elderly homes, abuses, and the difference between the ones there are the names next to it. Increasingly, the spots next to an elderly home not far from the elderly homes, not far from the state corrections offices, used criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Even changing where the street sign is has something to do with intelligence families at and conjunctive to highway Hangdog Lane and its conjunctions. I only know them seeking me out to record, confess, demonstrate, confirm these things. And also, it was faked for them. These are also people further involved with intercities through time. But that's also people involved with the campuses with predicate acts. One of the things that connects those people that communicate through others. Let's get them on paper, one name in sequence with the Weathersfield police that are switching names with the courts. Let's get them on paper, Judge Napolitano. And one of the scenes with Israeli people from Israel and people from um, Palestine were being counter extorted, being forced to entertain a quality of fact nature capable of freeing themselves. Because all sides, A through Z, have no legal representation. All exceptions and exception nature show them as those natures of legal representation as collusion slash S, including the lawyers that have been advertising on WFSB, WTNH, and Fox Connecticut News, and are also recorded, confessed, demonstrated from their influence to pretend it's personal when people complain about it. See, they have bad people that are controlling the syntax of what the announcers say in their stories, and they have wire and mail crime methods with their phones too, where they change and fake what people say when they mention predicate acts. They pretend they don't understand people. They're pretending people that are collusion slash S, increasingly with people that pretend to fake conversations with ourselves. And in other words, they put all fake transcripts. So all this stuff we have to read now. And then this is only the first time they did this. Then 2 times they have rolls of rape threats, digital crimes with Hartford Hospital that they forced me there for a month each time. And they, in other words, and they lied to get me in there. And they use truth to lie. In other words, just consciously. That's why they can't get on paper. Also, they have all kinds of tricks involved. They have a woman who confessed there's rules with a complaint box and the narratives and people involved with predicate acts with them. Let's get them on paper, one name and sequence. So my neighbors have roles. The ones with the name Cologne and Spot and Smith, with people with the that people that will work with the intelligence community at Harvard Hospital, who have roles with doctors, with their kids, with identity theft, fraud, slingers, putting predicate acts in databases. Increasingly, ones tied to mayors and their kids too, like ones with the name Gold, involved with predicate acts and planting identity thefts and frauds at and next to parks and campuses and in corners of streets and buildings. Collusion. So in the movie, there's also they said we send up our own satellite, so we have like a hyper archetypal criminal enterprise that that could have its own private communications, and that's what you that's even if it doesn't make sense, it makes the movie. So they have them extorted, and Reggie walks in, and I want to have a boxer, like a retired boxer, would be the best if we could have a retired champion, be it or an athlete like a football. In it, in his football career is over, but he works for local 230 now because now he's continuing to get his pension for construction. But now he's on the East Coast, and we're learning about the national and international unions. So because there are people named Cololo and Demoro, and they're educators, have roles with various unions, locations, and names next to them that were also brought up while they had roles with Phil Cololo and other people with this name Dillon, Kevin Dillon, who have been planting evidences on all sides of my house with people from Washington, D.C. and the World Trade Center associated with these people named Dillon. Has something to do with their names at and conjunctive too. Hangdog Lane and Two Rod Highway too. Identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake ties, fake nature ties to me. Has something to do with their roles with wire companies. They have people that work for AT&T or SNET, and their roles with names at the corner of Walker Hill and Knott Street. Has something to do with people that are putting fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. And sequence shifts is is something to do with the role there, which is also one of the ways. A whole bunch of conjunctions to and at the Weathersfield Community Center has something to do with people involved with the World Trade Center predicate acts and with WFSB and people at them and next to them and next to the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices of Weathersfield, Connecticut. In other words, there are people that have been involved with predicate acts methods. Weathersfield Pizza, for example, has roles with this, with wire crimes with Weathersfield Police, and with their educators involved with them with identity theft, fraud, slanders, fake ties, fake natures of ties to me. People planting, putting people in classes next to each other for criminally foreign influence to ends and to hide what came first. Dear God, let's get them on paper, Weathersfield. So they had, in other words, they had people in Palestine on one side of the thing, and there was a curtain up, and they have two TVs so they could see each other, but they had no clue where it was in the movie because there's a satellite in space. It's like a movie where there's like an anti-hyper archetypal criminal enterprise. But it's in the whole world is being tortured, extorted, and factory to enslaved. Therefore, physically, the ways we know. In other words, and we know too. I blame the other things others are so. Like for example, millions of people throughout America know that there's an extortion method, a torture, a slavery method that only allowed the suburbs to unfold the way they are, with limits and to cause negative value nature progressions, acts of nature, and be like a theater. But it's better than the cities, which is overtly more so than anything influenced by the breaching method that only allowed the suburbs. Otherwise, and everyone was taught, even sensed, having been speaking and thinking about other outside of internationally monitored conversations, those people were sensitive to their own for a method because of a slavery method. This preaching method has people consciously to an extent pretending they don't realize that when people say it. And they want to make fact accumulation examples. They couldn't do it. They have to use their nature. They have to pretend that anyone had integrity spoken for properly. So the names of the sciences are being have been used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactical delusions, raw use slash S of the names of the sciences, let alone the names of the people of the sciences. Forgiveness is because this came from off location slash S, and it fit all to roll with collusions with itself, what it had propagated. Those collusions were self cultivated, only allowed self cultivated, and that was sustained. Rolls with that, and that made more sustained styles, needs, and natures of factual nature, quality aspects in nature itself, as criminal and seditious nature that couldn't defend that and cannot defend it still. And also at the same time, from what really makes the worst U slash S of all locations, areas, and states. Predicate acts with facts, criminal and seditious nature is behind this. This is why we have problems with the borders and overt criminal enterprises. There's differences, rackets, with the people that spoke for the law, with the people that worked with them privately, foreign and domestic at those locations, covering up live progressions, all kinds of scams with the law names at Harvard Hospital, increasingly involved with fire departments, with Russians and Americans, leaking their roles with predicate acts with the Weathersfield police, refusing to identify themselves, and Inspector Mike. But no, they won't identify who the Inspector Mike is. He's involved with people with the fire departments in West Hartford, in Weathersfield, in Rocky Hill, New Britain. Covington Street has an owner of a building. I don't know if it's the same owner. If he sold it, he should not, he had broke the law because they should not have hid what he was involved with and is involved with. There are prosecutors and judges and people from other countries involved with the Saudi attackers and people from Canada and um can, and Mexico involved with criminal enterprises and sexual and medical offenders of kids, also with the families next to the campuses and medical ones. Harvard Hospital has roles with the Claudia Scalora, with people from Cuba, also before the World Trade Center attack collusions, because people from Cuba who work with psychiatry and prisons, like these are people on the state corrections offices and judicial branch offices. They're people with the name Demaro that looks a lot like an Aaron Mate on Judge Napolitano's YouTube channel. And he's involved with the Mark Halperin's house, with Heather Hansen, with people that broke into the house. And then she showed me it. But there was everything empty. I don't know when they broke in if everything was empty. And she explained that to me. And she had roles also with a home break-in in my house and confessions tied to that the police hid. And I'm learning more and more about that since, too. In other words, the hid what was recorded with that has something to do with that same corner was brought up relative to a recent home break-in at that house. But they were at that corner, and the house across the street from it has a guy who said he was the the partner of a Kevin Dillon, and his family lives there. These are people involved with Washington D.C. with two speech class teachers I had, also involved with predicate acts with them, identity theft, fraud, slander, sequence shifts, next to the state corrections offices, and with two speech class teachers I had with the people in the classroom. Attached to everyone lying to them about me and me about them. You know, but in other words, these aren't. That's why let's focus on the predicate acts with those teachers. I never had personal conversations with them. They also had students like Mike Pandolf is involved with some girl who has roles with Washington D.C. and people along Route 175 in their conjunctions, like associated with this. Also, the differences between Republicans and Democrats, the remote uses of their criminal insidiousness tactically. I'm not even a lawyer. There's a Trantolo involved with wire crime acts and methods and digital crimes with digital sex offenders, with judges and prosecutors, and WFSB involved with the principal child offender and their roles with the other agencies. There are proofs that they might have roles with some CIA, where they have roles putting concerts, and where they have roles with, evidences, rackets, identity theft, fraud, slanders. Yeah, get them on paper, one name and sequence. Let's go, black pupils. News, interbranch, anyone who disbelieves, get them on paper, one name and sequence. You can start with one. Let's go. In the medical, that faith conversation, get the Leahy family with the Brian Silver and others with the courts with this Leahy family on paper. Let's go. One name and sequence. Let's go. We'll make me vague.